Doug, I've come to know you not just as the lawyer I want fighting any case I ever have for me, but also as an incredible history buff. And your eyes light up a little bit when you talk about lots of history things. And one of the things I want to talk about with you is you have a way of talking about this moment in time where millions and millions of taxpayers' dollars were wasted on what you've called the most unsuccessful, basically, initiative in Canadian government history, was an attempt to surveil, harass, persecute people for just being queer. And tell us a little bit about what was going on at that time that allowed this egregious expenditure of taxpayers' dollars, and it was okay. It went on for decades.
It did. Assistant Commissioner McMurtry, please pay close attention. Okay, so in 1945, Igor Gouzenko walks out of the Soviet embassy and reveals to Canadians and Americans that there are Soviet spies everywhere, even in the House of Commons, Fred Rose. And there was this social panic about communists everywhere. And the fact that you couldn't tell a communist by looking at him, and that some guy you trusted might be a spy. Well then, later in the 1940s, Kinsey does his report, and people used to think that homosexuals were very unusual. Now suddenly he's telling them that 10% of the population are queer, and everyone's saying, oh my God, I was worried about the communists, now the queers are everywhere, what am I gonna do? I thought I could spot one a mile away. He might be sitting right next to me. And then those two things converged in 1950. And we had a Republican administration coming in on the heels of a Democratic administration, and they wanted to show that they were going to be tough on national security, and that the Democrats were corrupt and immoral, and that they didn't care about the United States, but the Republicans did. And so they concocted this theory that somehow queers were communists. And all communists were queers, and all queers were communists, and even the queers who weren't communists would be susceptible to blackmail, because you see, we are such weak people that we could be blackmailed by the Soviet Union, and we would sell out our country at the drop of a hat to protect ourselves. That was the working hypothesis for this police investigation, that our national security, the national security of the United States, was under threat by queer spies. And so this witch hunt began to find the queer spies. And they looked for queer spies for 40 years. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars looking for queer spies. How many queer spies did they find? None, not one in 40 years. And no one challenged this hypothesis. Why? Because, well, everyone knows. It's common sense. We don't need proof. We don't need evidence. I can rely on my common sense that queers are going to be blackmailed and their own spies. And eventually it took a lawsuit to bring this egregious waste of taxpayers' dollars. I understand they at one time had a whole floor at RCP headquarters in Ottawa dedicated to this. They were surveilling 30,000 Canadians because they wanted to try and spot the homosexuals before they even applied to the government. So they would interview a drag queen and say, please give us the names of the queers that you know, because we want to find out if any of them are working for the government. It was a ridiculous witch hunt, the most embarrassing police investigation, the longest running, most expensive, and least successful investigation in the history of Canadian policing. My father was a police officer, my grandfather was a police officer. When they conducted an investigation, if you didn't find a suspect within a couple of months, a year or two, that was the end of it. This went on forever. And I tell you folks, this premise, this lie, that queer people were unfit to serve, even though these people, I'm telling you, the people in the Her Survivor group, they're the most magnificent Canadians you'd want to meet. You know, this woman has the order. shot ourselves in the foot by firing these people. We got rid of some of the best civil servants we had, and we replaced them with a bunch of mediocre white frat boys who lost their jobs because they were state. So we harmed these people's lives, but we harmed our country too.
Wow.
Thank you, Doug.
Wow.